I'm Lloyd Holliday, and this is the Cost of a Thing podcast. Thanks for listening in today. So what happened to that great standard of living that we used to enjoy here in America in the 1960s and even into the 1970s? Well, that's what the Cost of a Thing podcast is all about, and that's what I'm going to be talking about here. Okay, today I'm going to do a podcast about the difference between today's technology and the technology in the 1960s. I know a lot of you, the younger people, who might be thinking, oh my gosh, how did they get by without computers in their everyday lives and cell phones and all these internet apps and so forth? How did we do it? Well, I will say this, we did just fine without all that stuff. There were other ways to get things done, and a lot of times, in my opinion, those ways were better. Okay, and I'm going to definitely do this in several parts because there's just too many things to talk about in one podcast. Today, I'm going to talk about 3 technological devices of today versus their counterparts that we had in the 1960s. And number 1 is telephones. Number 2 is audio and video recording devices. And number 3 is cars and trucks, automobiles. One of the most obvious things we have today is cell phones. Everybody's got a cell phone. They had cell phones in the 60s and 70s, but only the very, very wealthy could have them, and probably only very large cities where they had a network set up for those. So they had them, but not everybody had them. Only the very wealthy people had those. So what did the regular guy do for phones? We had a phone at home, a landline. Everybody had that. What we had was payphones. There was payphones everywhere. Payphones in restaurants, gas stations, grocery stores, street corners, phone booths. You remember the old phone booths? Those are all pretty much gone now. They don't have those, but they had them everywhere. So if you wanted to make a phone call, all you had to have was a dime, and you put it in the phone, and there was your call. And so I know today the phones do a lot more things than just make calls. They're like little computers, but you really don't need them to communicate like we did in the 1960s and 70s. Payphones were fine. I never remember having a problem getting in touch with somebody. In fact, it was nice not to have cell phones and be staring into cell phones day and night like people do now. And another drawback of cell phones is that sometimes you don't want to be contacted, and I know you can turn the cell phone off or whatever like that, but in the old days, you could just walk away from the landline and be outside or be somewhere. Nobody could contact you. You could kind of just get away for a while. Whereas now it's pretty hard to do that when you're carrying that around on you all day long. And then if you don't call somebody back right away, they might get upset. They might, how come you didn't call me back? In the old days, you just weren't around, and they would understand why you couldn't call them back right away. There wasn't even message phones then, so they couldn't leave a message. So they didn't get you on the phone right then and there. That was it until they tried to call you later. Okay, the next thing is recording devices like little memory chips and things like that you can record music on into your iPod or into your phone, or memory sticks and things like that you can record music or video on and then watch it later. Well, we had plenty in the 60s and 70s. We had plenty of recording devices for audio. We had cassette tapes, 8-track tapes, reel-to-reel tapes, all kinds of recording devices, records, the vinyl records. So we had plenty of great music and plenty, if we wanted to record something audio, we sure could do it. And also people had 8mm movie cameras, and they could record video with that if they wanted to. But it was on a little, movie spool, and you had to go down and get it developed and all that kind of thing, like you did with photographs. So maybe what we have today is a little better than that. You can, you got a little bit easier availability and to record things, but really not that much better from my point of view. We still had the stuff and we could still record things. Now, one thing we didn't have that we have today is like the VCR type things. And of course, they don't even have those anymore. Now it's, they're recording to the DVD if they want to record off TV. Or maybe it just goes to a digital recording device. Okay, another thing today, you have more technologically advanced cars, like hybrids, battery-powered cars, and those kind of things. Well, that doesn't really, in my opinion, give that big of an advantage because we had great cars in the 60s. Now, they didn't get as good a gas mileage, but gas was more plentiful most of the time back then, except for a couple of oil embargoes and things like that. Gas was cheap. I remember back when gas was 25 cents a gallon, certainly 35 cents a gallon. Now it's relatively not that expensive because they've been doing a lot of drilling and so forth and fracking. But if they quit doing that, boy, gas could go up $5, $7, $10 a gallon. I hope that doesn't happen. But the 60s and 70s cars, I think, are much better looking than the cars today. And they were plenty fast. They had the big V8 engines, and if you wanted a fast car, you could get one. Now, I don't think they're as fast as the cars today, but I think the extra speed of today is just overkill. Nobody needs to go 200 miles an hour on the highway or 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. 0 to 60 in 5 or 6 seconds is plenty fast, and that's what most of the cars with the V8s would do back in the 1960s and 70s. Now I'm going to say one thing about the cars of today. They may be a little more reliable. They probably are a little more efficient on gas because of the computers that are in them and the computer modules, the microprocessor modules. Some of these cars have 10 or 15 microprocessor modules controlling the air conditioning system, the windows, the lights, the door locks, everything you got in them. They're controlled by computer now, which in the old days they were just directly wired. In the 60s and 70s, you had no computers in the cars. Now the problem with computers, that's a big disadvantage, is that if it breaks, you can't fix it. You got to take that to the dealership. And depending on the model of the car, if it's a Mercedes or a BMW or even a Toyota or those kind of cars, any car really, it's going to cost a lot of money to fix a module. My car was just in, 2 modules went out, it cost me $1,200. It was in there like 2 weeks. They had a hard time figuring it out. They had to have their specialist mechanic had to wait till he broke free so he could look at that. This was at a dealership. So this is the disadvantage. In the old days, if something went wrong, you could track it down yourself with a digital multimeter. But now, even if you could buy the modules, if you figured out which module it was, and you can buy the module and put it in and plug it in, but it won't work. You have to reprogram it to your specific car. You have to have the correct machines to do that and know how to be able to do that, to reprogram those modules to your particular car. So you got to take it to the dealers, and they love it. They will charge you thousands of dollars to fix these modules. And then your car will be in there. Mine was in for 2 weeks. They had to order 2 different, parts and they're 2 different orders. So they had to wait twice for two to come in because when they put the first one in, the second one was still broken and it didn't fix it. So they had to wait and figure out, troubleshoot it, and find out there were 2 modules bad and order those on separate orders, which took a few days to get in. Like I said, they had to have their most specialized guy work on it because a lot of those people don't have the skills that are even working at the dealerships. Anyway, that is a big drawback of the modern cars today, and that's going to continue. These are going to get worse. Someday you may not even be able to work on your own car, and that's a problem for me. I like the old car. I like the old cars in that you can work on them. They're relatively simple to work on, and you can troubleshoot and figure it out. And if you buy a new part and put it in, it's going to work. You don't have to reprogram anything. And matter of fact, right now, since I went through that experience where it cost me $1,200 to fix those modules. I'm considering getting another car later on in a year or so, but I might just buy an old 70s car, like a kind of a classic 70s car, like maybe, I don't know, an old Corvette, something like that I can just fool around with no computers in it. And that'll be my, just my second car, just something to fool around with. But I really am reluctant now to buy a new car. And some of the things that I also don't like about the new cars is they've got these little vicinity key fob things where if your key just gets within a few feet of the car, then you can just push the button and start it. Well, I don't really like that because people can steal those codes electronically through the radio waves that come off of that thing. And then they can just start your car the same way or open it. Another thing I don't like about modern cars, they're guided by wire. In other words, instead of having a cable going from your foot pedal up to the carburetor or to the fuel injection, to give your car acceleration, it'll just be done by radio wave from the foot pedal up to the fuel injection intake. And lots of things are done like that now in cars. I don't like that either, because if one of the transmitters or the receiver, say the transmitter at the accelerator pedal breaks or doesn't work, well, then it doesn't work. Or if the receiver up at the fuel injection intake doesn't work, well, then you don't get any gas and your car's dead. So then you got to guess what? You can't fix that. It's probably a module. You're going to have to take it into the dealership, and it's probably going to be hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to fix that. So I just like an old cable. Put a cable in there. That worked fine. I don't see why that was a problem, that they had to go to these computer modules for everything. That's a big drawback on the modern cars. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up with those three things today. And as you can see, we had those things, telephones, cars, and recording devices back in the 60s, and maybe they weren't as advanced as they are today, but we still had them and had a very nice life using those things. And there even was some advantage to not having the very advanced technology in those areas that we have today. Now, I'm going to do a few more of these 60s technology versus the technology of today until I cover everything that I can think of. Thank you for listening in today. And until next time, this is Lloyd Holliday signing off.